We're going to begin with some good friends of the show. I'm joined by the CBC senior business reporter, Peter Armstrong, and the host of CBC's The House, Catherine Cullen. Good to see you both. Happy Budget Eve to those who celebrate. Catherine, look, we know we're going to have a pretty big deficit. We know we're going to have a big push for diversification. What else do we know about the Carney government's first budget?
Well, David, according to a senior Canadian official, tens of billions of dollars in savings in the coming year. What does savings mean? Yes, that means they are going to be cutting some government programs. This is something we've been looking to see, right? Just how big are the cuts going to be? What's an example? Trees. No, they will not actually be cutting down trees, but the government's 2 billion tree program, they're putting a stop to it. They will not end existing contracts. So we're going to get to about 1 billion trees. We're going to get about halfway there. This may not be the most sort of eye-popping example, but it gives us a sense of the kind of choices that the government is making, right? How is this going to get applied to other parts of government? What will they cut back on in terms of government spending, whether it's in Indigenous services, whether it's in foreign aid, Health Canada? So 2 billion trees, one example, but a lot more we want to see. We're learning that there will be changes to the tax structure meant to support investment. They are going to include changes to the capital allowance. Folks in and around government talking about the idea of how pro-growth this budget is going to be. Pro-growth, yes, but also that expenditure review where they are talking about things like streamlining delivery, recalibrating programs, modernizing operations. What does all of it mean? We know this is a government that wants to take this kick at the can to change the way government operates. I think one of the big questions we're waiting to see in this budget is just how far they go in the budget and ultimately how far they're actually willing to go. Is this just jobs and programs being removed here and there, or is this a more fundamental shift?
Right. So, Peter, we know the business community is watching this because the economically uncertain times, the bank has done what it can on interest rates. So it's over to fiscal policy and tax policy. We know the deficit's going to be big. I'm reliably sure it will be under $100 billion, if that gives you comfort.
It got to $100 billion fast, right? Like a couple weeks ago, we were talking about a $68 billion, and now all of a sudden it's less than $100 billion. Look, I mean, I don't have all the insight that Catherine has, and I'm going to go into this tomorrow really interested to see the actual numbers, right? A budget is an exercise in storytelling. They're trying to tell us a tale about the Canadian economy, about this moment, this hinge moment that he talks about, where we're headed, and how we're all going to try to get there. And I'm going to leave the poetry in the front of the book to you guys to read through. I'm going to go straight to the annexes, and I'm going to look. The first number I'm going to look for is government revenue, because that's going to tell us so much about how much they actually project the Canadian economy to grow in the next year, 5 years. I'm going to look at where are the actual numbers in this, because we're going to have two sets of the numbers now to try to compare them against each other. But that's where we're going to really see the rubber hit the road here. And I'll be interested to see, in looking at those numbers, are they talking to regular Canadians? Are they talking to like households? Are they talking to Canadian businesses? Are they talking to like the big Canadian industrial sectors? Or are they talking to foreign investors that want their money coming in and flooding into these major projects?
Can't it be all of the above?
This is where I think governments often find themselves in trouble, is when they try to talk to everybody at once, the message gets muddied. If they say, we're going to try to paint a picture of a Canadian economy that is struggling, that is having a hard time, but this is what we're doing for businesses, this is how we're going to address the industrial sector, and this is why that foreign capital needs to flow in and has a place to land here, then you can get one cohesive message. When you got a bunch, that gets messy.
So go ahead.
And to that end, I mean, Peter talks about the poetry at the front of the budget. Is this a haiku? Is it a sonnet, right? Is this something where we're really trying to keep it tight and the focus is on the idea of pulling back on spending? Or is it this massive investment in Canada's future? You know, Mark Carney talking about swinging for the fences, fortune favors the bold.
Right. So, or if it's a limerick, we're in a lot of trouble. But, you know, Peter, we know there's going to be a growth in the debt because of the deficit. The test for a lot of people is, what does that debt buy? Does it buy growth? Does it buy productivity? Or is it just more program expansion and money cycling around? It needs to be on the growth side in a real way. So what do you think business is looking for there? We know there's something on tax competitiveness. We just don't know what.
And look, I think what we're going to see in terms of corporate taxes is I'm hearing a lot of debate. I'm hearing a lot of people that claim to know what they think is going to be in this. I can't wait to see who amongst the people I've spoken to in the last week are right. But at the end of the day, I think what businesses that I've been speaking with, the CEOs and the C-suite, the business leaders in Canada, there is an argument to be made that the problem with the last 10 or 15 years wasn't for lack of ambition, it was for lack of execution.
Yeah.
That there were these great grand ideas that were sort of thrown out there, and what the last iteration of this Liberal government didn't do as well at was the implementation of these ideas, the supporting at the municipal and provincial levels that it takes work to get all this stuff done. And is this government willing to get the work done? And what is it doing to get these projects through? What is it doing to support workers while it does that? There's a lot of sort of competing. And as you say, there's a lot of messages to get out there. But as long as they're all sort of funneling towards that one goal of advancing the Canadian economy down this very rocky road we're on to a place where it can see some growth, right? We're going to be a couple of years now with like 1%, 1.1, 1.2% growth. That is not a great environment to be investing into. So how do you induce that investment? How do you say, look, we're going to cover the bases here. Your investment's going to be able to return some dividend here. Right. This is how we're going to get it done.
Well, Catherine, the execution point's a key one, right? And a difference, I would say, is that the focus of the growth and diversification comes directly from the Prime Minister himself, right? So there is more of a direct focus from the new boss. It's a question of whether his vision is something Canadians want and whether the opposition can support it, because it is still a minority parliament.
Well, indeed. And there has been, I think, this growing fervor around Parliament Hill over the course of the last few days. More and more nerves about whether or not this budget actually will pass. I mean, I think a lot of people are looking to the NDP as the most reliable, perhaps not dance partner, but ones who are willing to sit on the side of the dance.
Stay against the wall.
That's
like in junior high.
You know, if you could just hang back. But it's clear that there's a lot of uncertainty, and you talk to MPs from various parties. They're not quite sure how this is going to play out. I will say, I need a new suitcase. I'm not buying one yet for the next election campaign, David. I'm not convinced that we're going to find ourselves going to the polls, but the jockeying is happening. And I think it's interesting to see, too, if we think this comes down to the NDP, what might be in this budget that speaks to particular priorities of specific NDP MPs that might make it a bit harder for them to actually vote against it? Are there things like that that the government is doing? How are they going to get this over the line? I mean, Mark Carney and Steve McKinnon have sounded like folks who really just want to get this done by sense that the budget itself has enough virtue into it. It's the right thing for Canadians, and that's how it's going to get done. We'll see.
Yeah, I was talking to a Conservative today who's open to voting for the budget. Doesn't know what they're going to do just yet, which is a little bit different than I think the lines coming from the OLO. But Peter, when you look at the economic situation, you know, as a guy who covers that and used to work here on Parliament Hill back in the day, I mean, how's the business community viewing the idea of going back into a period of political instability in an election? I mean, do they just want the government to get on with this, do you think?
Yeah,
you know?
yeah, that's pretty much it. Just come on, guys, we got some work to do here.
Yeah.
I don't think the uncertainty of the politics in this moment has really left Parliament Hill. I think the people I talked to in Toronto, I was talking to somebody in Vancouver and Halifax just yesterday. They don't think it would be rational. They don't think it would make sense. And so they're not at a place yet where they believe that it might happen, because it wouldn't be any good for the message. It wouldn't be any good for those foreign investors I was talking about. It wouldn't be any good for Canadian workers. List the things that you need to get done right now. Are any of them made better by an election? So the business community is saying that wouldn't make any sense. The problem, though, is we don't live in very sensical times right now. There's all kinds of things that are irrational that are happening around us every day. Yes,
but you know, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. It seems like there is a real moment here, and we'll see if parliamentarians can meet it. All right, that's Peter Armstrong and Catherine Cullen. Both are going to be part of special budget coverage tomorrow on television and CBC Radio. Thank you very much, gang, for being here. Well, we are less than 24 hours to go until the budget is tabled. It does remain unclear where the government will get the votes to pass it. Today, NDP interim leader Don Davies laid the blame for a possible election squarely on the Prime Minister.
He has to draft a budget as a Prime Minister in a minority parliament that earns the support of one other party, and that's his job. You know, it's not my job. I don't hold the pen. I'm not the government. It's up to him to craft that budget, and we've been very clear about the kinds of things that would have to be in that budget to earn our support. So, do we want an election? No. Do we need one? No. It's up to Mr. Carney whether we have one or not.
So clearly there's going to be a lot to watch for on the political front tomorrow. But when it comes to what's best for the economy, what exactly does Canada need to weather those U.S. tariffs? Randall Bartlett is the Senior Director of Canadian Economics at Desjardins Group. Randall Bartlett, it's good to see you again. Thanks for being here, sir.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.
So we know from the Prime Minister and everybody else that we're going to get a substantial deficit in this particular budget. But what does that deficit need to buy for it to be a worthwhile addition to the debt?
What we're looking for from the deficit is increased spending on capital, and that's increased spending on infrastructure like roads, rail, ports, airports. In addition to increased defense spending, that's going to help the economic benefits in Canada and hopefully increase innovation and productivity in the country, which helps to boost living standards and incomes and ultimately revenues, and helps to keep a lid on those deficits. So that's really what we're going to be looking for in this budget.
So when we've seen economic crises in the past, we saw a lot of stimulus spending, right? Money going out the door to do capital projects just to create economic activity. But this is less of a cyclical downturn and more of a structural hit, it seems. So what you're talking about there is more long-term transformational investments that shorten economic distance and just boost productivity.
That's right. I mean, what we're seeing now is a reorientation of the Canadian economy away from being dependent on trade with the US. It'll always be our biggest trading partner, but certainly we're seeing that that relationship has been meaningfully disrupted. And so the federal government's looking to invest in the infrastructure and innovation that's going to help to reorient the economy and make sure that we can hang on to the living standards we have and see them increase further, even in the event of such a volatile relationship with the US.
So we know the deficit is going to be a big number, an eye-popping number. Is there a number that is simply too large? Because I know you've made the point this is a bit of a gamble, that either this unlocks economic growth for the long term or it just compounds an already difficult debt situation. Is that about the number or the makeup of the number?
So we're expecting a deficit of about $75 billion in the current fiscal year. We've seen estimates and rumors of as much as $100 billion in the current fiscal year. So we know the number is going to be big. But what's really going to matter is where that money is being spent and what's driving that deficit. And if what we see is that that money is going to things like infrastructure or tax cuts that are going to boost investment in the country and boost overall economic growth, that's really what we're going to be looking for in this budget. So the number is going to be big. We all know that. The number is not just big in Canada, it's big around the world right now. But where is all of that money going? And if it's going to growing the economy in a long-term structural way, as opposed to just income transfers for the short term and giving a short-term sugar high, that's really what we're going to be looking for in this budget.
Okay, when you talk about tax cuts as a possibility, and we do expect there to be some incentives in this budget to try to drive capital investment, do you want to see things like investment tax credits and capital cost allowance? Is it more targeted and incentive-driven over, say, an across-the-board, say, corporate tax cut?
You know, I think the environment that we're in right now is very different than we were a year ago, even when it comes to tax policies. So we look at what the Americans have done and allowing for essentially immediate depreciation of capital assets. That's supporting a boom in investment there around things like data centers. And so Canada, has to have a somewhat competitive tax policy to attract investment from around the world. And I think we're going to see some of that in the budget tomorrow. We don't have a lot of details, but we do know that there are going to be changes to corporate income tax policy around pulling in more investment. We saw that the federal government rolled back the increase in the capital gains inclusion rate for individuals and corporations. And a big part of the motivation for that is that capital taxes ultimately have the largest impact on long-term economic growth and output. And so we've already seen a reorientation away from capital taxes and taxes on investment in Canada. And we're expecting to see more of that in the budget tomorrow to keep up with the neighbors to the south, but also make sure that we're an attractive destination for capital investment.
Look, the election was only April 28th, but it seems like a lifetime ago with everything that's happened. And in the Liberal platform in this campaign, they promised to, in their words, catalyze, to use the word the Prime Minister's fond of, $500 billion in private investment over 5 years. What does this budget need to do if it's going to hit that target?
Well, I think we've seen this play out before. When we look at things like the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which was supposed to attract enormous private sector capital and struggled to do that over the years. I think what we need is really a reorientation toward having a more certain environment for investment, attracting not just investment from, say, Canadian pension funds and institutional investors, but investment from around the world, and saying we have a more certain environment for investment, for approval of projects. You don't guarantee approval, but at least you have a process that's clear and transparent, an environment that is more welcoming to international investment, whether it comes to roads, rail, ports, airports, whether it comes to other types of capital investment in R&D and data centers, centers. So I think we really need to create this environment through the tax system as well as through government support that helps to catalyze some of that investment and really attract international capital and even domestic capital to projects that are going to grow the Canadian economy and support our living standards over the long term.
So when we see the numbers tomorrow, we're going to get a bit of clarity on what spend less to invest more actually means in dollars and cents terms. I mean, how will you evaluate that? We know there's going to be a 3-year plan to do spending reductions, and it gets us some level of an operational balance, not a total balance, because they're dividing the budget into operations and capital. What are you going to be looking for there on the spending reduction side, and how they define each thing in each bucket, whether it's a capital expense or an operational expense?
Well, I think we've already been given a sense of what's going to be considered operating spending versus capital spending, and we're not big fans of how they've rolled this out so far. I think the PBO put it well in saying that the definition was quite generous in terms of what's considered capital and not. Would have been nice to see something that's more in line with Canadian public sector accounting standards in order to make sure that the government is able to be held to account and that the fiscal anchors that they're bringing in are meaningful. But we think that rating agencies and analysts like ourselves are really going to be looking to what's the bottom line deficit and what does the debt to GDP track look like, because that's really at the end of the day what matters. But I think what Canadians are going to be looking for as we go out into the future is both that operating spending is coming down, that the federal government, they've put numbers in the window, reducing it by 15% relative to the fall economic statement 2024, 3 years into the future. So are they on track to meet those targets? What's the plan? Is it transparent, and is it achievable? And then on the capital investment side, when we go into potentially the next federal election several years out, are we seeing shovels in the ground? Are we seeing meaningful projects taking place? Are we seeing the investment that Canadians were hoping for? And are we seeing the economic returns that are going to be paying dividends going into the future?
Just one last quick question. I mean, we sort of laid out what you think would make this, at least the potential for a successful budget on the growth side. What's the one thing, if you see it tomorrow, you're going to go, uh-oh, they didn't do it right? What would be the thing that would show they missed the moment?
For me, it's going to be just the lack of transparency, that if we don't see a clear plan to find the savings, if we don't see a clear plan on how they're going to be allocating the new spending for defense, for infrastructure, for other investments, if it's a short budget that's just saying, here's some big numbers, but trust us, we can deliver, I think that that's going to be something that raises some red flags for me.
Randall Bartlett, Senior Director of Canadian Economics at Desjardins Group. We appreciate the time, sir. Thanks for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne is describing tomorrow's budget as generational, and he's optimistic some opposition parties will get behind it.
Listen, this is going to be an investment budget, the kind of budget that you will remember, because there will be no surprises. Canadians have asked us to build big, bold things. They expect us to do things differently. So we're going to make generational investments that will build our country. We're moving from reliance to resilience, from uncertainty to prosperity. We're going to do the kind of things that will make this country stronger.
Following a long-standing tradition, which I've never really understood, Champagne picked out his budget footwear tomorrow. But in what could maybe be a metaphor for tomorrow's budget, he built his own shoes with help from staff at Boulet Boots, a family-owned business in Champagne's Quebec riding. It's known for its cowboy boots, but also supplies footwear for the RCMP and the Canadian Armed Forces. And Champagne decided on a more classic dress shoe, and one that's black, so it meets the new dress code in this government. We're going to start there with the Power Panel. Emily Nicola is a columnist for Le Devoir. Supriya Dwivedi was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Kate Harrison is a conservative political analyst, and here with me in the studio is Jordan Likeness. She is a former NDP strategist. Good to see you all. Gang, thank you for being here on the night before the big budget. Jordan, I was saying earlier, when it comes to this budget and whether or not it could pass or fail, I said, you play stupid games, you win stupid prizes. That's not just voting against it if you're opposition, it's tabling a budget that nobody can support if you're government. But Champagne said today, no surprises. That suggests nothing, no curveball coming. What's your sense of it?
Well, I'm not sure it solves their problem.
Maybe not.
The surprise at this point is going to be who can support the budget when they framed it up, I would argue, in a way that appeals mostly to the people least likely in Parliament to support it, which is the Conservatives. They've pitched this budget as a budget of sacrifice, of cuts, of austerity, whatever wording you want to use. And that is one that politically is going to be very difficult for either the Bloc or the NDP to support. So the challenges that the government is having right now in figuring out who they're going to dance with are a little bit of their own making in terms of how they've framed up and pitched this budget. Now, we'll have to see when the budget is tabled what the investment side of that is. But what we know so far is that the largest chunk of that investment is going to be military spending. That was something that Carney did not run on. And that is really one of the things that they're using to drive their arguments about cuts needing to happen elsewhere.
Okay, I want to hold off a little bit on the parliamentary machinations a little bit later in the conversation. But Kate, you know, you've heard the minister call it generational. I don't know if that's because it's going to age us with what we see tomorrow, or if it is a budget, you know, that hits all the different generations in a good way. But what is it you think needs to be in there tomorrow to help the economy deal with the challenges that it's facing right now?
Yeah, it might be generational because future generations are going to be still paying off the massive deficit that is expected tomorrow. I think, you know, Jordan talks about one frame around austerity for this budget. I think this is a Rorschach test budget. You will see what you want to see. It's both sacrifice required on young people, but it's building big. It's austerity, but it's grand investment. So if it sounds too good to be true, that's because the government is trying to have it both ways. So what should actually be in there that will connect with people? It's affordability measures. And that doesn't mean just whipping out the taxpayer credit card and trying to give sectoral relief for tariff impacted sectors. It's going back to the foundations of investment in this country, looking at things like the industrial carbon tax and the impact that has on food prices, on the impact of producing any kind of good, going back to clean fuel regulations, for example. This isn't sexy stuff, but it's stuff that will have a meaningful impact on actually reducing the cost of living for a lot of Canadians. So I think Canadians are getting tired of just the government spending to the hilt, using the taxpayer money to do this, as opposed to looking at more creative ways to attract more private investment here. And I think that, to Jordan's point, we're going to see a lot of long-term investment on things that were neglected for many years. Military spending is one of them. But what's the retail politic message coming out of the budget tomorrow? I think that so far the government hasn't connected the dots in terms of this generational investment and spending and what it means actually for day-to-day affordability for Canadians.
So Priya, is it about meeting the day-to-day, or is it about spelling something out clear for the long term in that, you know, the self-reliance, the lack of dependence on the Americans, and the diversification that is clearly required here? That seems to be what they're focusing on, and what we're hearing is a lot of tax competitiveness issues, all designed to bring investment into the country. I mean, what's your sense of what they need to deliver here on the economic side?
I mean, the short answer is both, right? Like, you do need to address the long-term issues and the long-term solves or solutions that this government is purportedly going to come up with, but you also have to meet the moment and where Canadians are in their day-to-day right now. And to, you know, both Jordan and Kate's points in terms of who is going to be asked to be making those sacrifices or who is going to be asked to be making those future payments, I think that is incredibly true, especially when at a moment, you know, things are quite expensive in terms of day-to-day needs for Canadians. And, you know, look, I know a lot of us, arguably myself included, rolled our eyes when Chrystia Freeland used the term vibe session. But there is something to be said about how the vibes are and what the vibes are in a country at any given moment. And right now, particularly if you are a little bit younger, you are feeling the pinch. If you are a younger family, let's say, and you're not in a house yet, and you're still renting, and you're looking to save up, I mean, increasingly, home ownership is looking like it's out of grasp for young Canadians. And, you know, if you are one of the lucky few that are in a home and you're 40 and under, 45 and under, chances are you had parental help to get there. And I don't think that's where we want to be as a country. I certainly don't think that's what this federal government is trying to paint for this country and trying to move us forward. But again, you have to do both of those things. It has to be both long-term vision and also day-to-day vibes.
Emily, how do you see it? I agree, vibes matter. I don't know if it's the finance minister of the day who should be talking about that, though. No. But But how do you see it in terms of what Mark Carney needs to deliver on the economic side tomorrow?
I love that you're saying Mark Carney, because that really is the case. I think in terms of the symbolism of François-Philippe Champagne building his own shoes. It might be that he has the time to do this because a lot of it seems to be coming from the PMO's office and not from the Ministers of Finance itself. And it's something that we haven't seen in a really long time in Canada, the Prime Minister being so directly involved in crafting the economic policies for this country. And because it is actually coming a brainchild of Mark Carney, I expect to see his use of the word generational to mean something around the line of we need to really pivot the Canadian economy as to face basically the threat that the United States represents. So a lot of investments in some economic sectors, and as well as trying to pivot those into trying to find, for example, solutions for the housing crisis by using local resources that the Americans don't want as much anymore. I expect a lot of cuts, and I know that there's been a lot of negotiation inside certain departments so that those cuts would not impact core programming and really be into administrative stuff as much as possible. And we'll see how much of programming that actually impact people's social net and safety support is actually being cut tomorrow by the federal government. But I do see a man in charge who will be a prime minister that uses a Canadian budget as to craft his vision of Canada. And so that's why when I hear the word generational budget, that's what I think it will be. And so to other people's concern about affordability, yes, it might be there, but I don't think that's Mark Carney's personal kink as much as trying to, be a former banker and public servants trying to reinvent Canada's economy. And so I think that's what we're going to see in terms of the major announcement. And the other meaning of the word generational might be that in order to do that, you throw under the bus some of Canada's climate targets in terms of reducing emission. And so that might be the thing that people will not pay attention to, but that the next generation will remember in terms of what is the long-lasting impact of this budget.
Okay, so on that point, as I understand it, look, there's going to be a lot in this budget. It's $400 or $500 billion. Sort of four big things that I'm looking for. There's obviously the deficit, Jordan, which will be eye-popping. There's the diversification plan, which will be the core focus of the economic side. There is going to be the climate competitiveness plan in this, because you cannot do investment attraction without answering the questions about your climate policy. And then there's the cost reductions over time. In the climate plan, it sounds to me like the emissions cap is gone. Like it's never really been put into place, but it's going to be stillborn. And maybe some enhanced or revised industrial carbon pricing policy is going to replace it. Now, that's a simpler market-driven approach, if is what comes to pass. But it is, again, another potential signature policy of the Trudeau government, moving aside, in addition to the fact, as first reported by the Globe, the 2 billion trees, that's gone. Like what they've...
I mean, the 2 billion trees were never there.
Well, like the program has gone. What they've committed to plan and do, they will go ahead with, but it's going to kind of stop there. I mean, what do you make of this, that if there is this urgency to sort of give clarity to businesses to bring money in and create economic opportunity, but certain other things start to go?
Well, I mean, look, this is the challenge of the Carney government writ large, right? So we have a government here that is trying to distance itself as fast and as far as it possibly can from anything that Justin Trudeau did. But it came to power through a lot of voters who were NDP Liberal switchers. So the challenge for the government politically on this is that a lot of these moves will be pretty alienating to the progressives that put Mr. Carney in the Prime Minister's chair. Now, as it comes to the emissions cap, I think this is obviously a larger part of a grand bargain that the Prime Minister hopes to strike with the oil patch. And so that's also part of the diversification play that he wants to make with the Canadian economy. We will have to see what happens there. I think that history has shown us that Danielle Smith and the government in Alberta has a pretty vested interest in continuing and having ongoing conflict with Ottawa over this, rather than getting to a particular solution on it. But there's no question that he is making some very significant turns here away from Trudeau's policies. But I think the challenge remains that for a lot of Canadians, the concerns that they have are much more closely tied to issues of affordability in their day-to-day life, rather than to some of these longer-term structural things in our economy that they may trust the Prime Minister on, but that they're not going to see results on anytime soon in their day-to-day life.
How do you fix affordability, though, without long-term structural change? Because it is that kind of slow growth and lessened economic opportunity that's part of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, the Canadian economy clearly needs to diversify away from the United States, and the dependence on the U.S. is very evidently not healthy for us now. But the problem is that politically, for the government to be making an argument around borrowing massive amounts of money to grow the economy without also making sure that that prosperity is shared among Canadians, that's a huge, huge risk for them, because we're seeing right now massive levels of inequality, record high since StatsCan started tracking this, and people are feeling it in their day-to-day lives. One of the biggest divides right now in Canada is whether you own a home or not. Yeah. And so for those people, the government can be putting lots and lots of money into housing construction, but that's not going to make an immediate difference to their lives. So the government needs to find some answer for them in this as they put these plans forward.
So Kate, you know, as you see this focus on trying to attract capital, this is what we anticipate, sort of they view, the Liberals should talk to say this is the budget the country needs, we'll see. Moving away from things like the emissions cap, I mean, how do you think that's going to play with the investment community in terms of spending the money on the projects that everyone says the country needs?
Yeah, that will be a positive. There are other things that need to be done, David, in order to make sure that that investment comes here, looking at getting rid of the tanker ban and other problematic pieces of legislation that the previous administration brought in, which the current government has not yet touched, are part of that equation as well. Again, the industrial carbon price, if there's a change on that tomorrow in the downward direction, then that would be a positive development as well. But so far, we have, you know, a list of projects that the government aspires to do, and many of which are kind of fully under development now. But investors want to see two things. They want to see some of those problematic regulations go away. And again, the government has been reluctant to do that because, to Jordan's point, there are a lot of progressives that elected them, including members around the cabinet table, that will be very sad to see that go. The EV mandate is also an open question. Do we see something on that or not? They also want a stable investment environment. And I think the question about where we sit with the United States and shoring up that relationship with our largest trading partner continues to cast doubt on investors. It was a major ambition of this government and a stated goal to have something in place ahead of the budget so that investors could bring their money here with confidence. We don't have that. The last week has been terrible with respect to trying to make clear to investors that, you know, we've got our act together on trade with the U.S. So that will not be dealt with in tomorrow's budget. Instead, we will be accruing more deficit and more debt to shore up sectoral workforces that are impacted by tariffs because the government has failed to deliver the deal that they promised back in the spring.
Well, it sounds more like it's going to be a broad-based sort of investment climate approach. I mean, we'll see. I'm sure there's going to be something there for sectoral. But, you know, Supriya, I know there's been the new focus has shifted to the industrial carbon price. You know, the Conservatives say it drives up the price of food, even though there's studies after study that shows like 0.5 to 0.8% of the actual increase. I mean, you don't buy a tractor every month, so it's not a month-over-month inflation pressure on the firm, right? But this is a move away from things that the government you worked for ran on and implemented, and the coalition that voted for the Prime Minister you worked for liked and didn't necessarily know was going to be a possible casualty of the management change they went through. So how do you think that if this is what comes to pass, because Mark Carney showed no affection for this particular policy, what does that do to the political coalition for the Liberals?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think it was Jordan that said it initially, but the toughest thing for this government is seemingly that they're setting up a budget that is more likely for the conservative audience to want to support, when what they really need in terms of at least it passing is to shore up some progressive stuff in there to ensure that they're going to have the votes to pass this thing. And I think when you're talking about certain policies being, you know, I think most Canadians, including most capital P partisan Canadians, even if they are MPs or around the cabinet table, can certainly understand that situations evolve and policies do perhaps need to meet a certain moment or have to go through changes in order to, move forward on other aspects. That to me isn't the biggest issue. The biggest issue will be how it ends up being communicated and if there's a plan to mitigate from some of from some of the other issues. So, like, for example, if Emily is talking about getting rid of a whole host of potentially environmental measures in the short term, let's say, because you need to match what the U.S. is doing and you want to make sure that investors have confidence to put their dollars in Canada, is there anything to offset that? We know the trees are gone, for example, but is there anything else in there that could perhaps, be seen as like a bone of sorts that's thrown to the progressive side of things? Because I think right now that nobody questions the fact that, Mr. Carney has an incredibly impressive CV and is obviously a very, well positioned person to be leading the country through this time of economic uncertainty. But can he meet the sort of empathetic needs? Can he meet the political moment of having to sell the budget?
Yeah, look, a lot of people who are supporters of the emissions reduction goals of the government argued that the emissions cap never should have been pursued because it was too complicated. It was a mix of regulations. You should have just gone pure carbon pricing and done it that way.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we'll have to see, right, like what the details are and if there are, in fact, these major changes and how people respond to it. But, Emily, just as a final point on this, I mean, is it are these measures that appeal to conservatives and ignore progressives, or are these measures that sort of like try to hit the middle of where Canadian voters are rather than the political class? Because there's been a sort of a clustering around sort of that centrism since Donald Trump became a real big force in politics this year.
I think that's a good question. I think it fits basically what Mark Carney wants to do and what his vision for the country is. And his vision tend to overlap with people who would have historically qualified as rhetorics in some ways. And so it's making it, for some people who are more progressive conservatives, it's making it hard for them to pick things to criticize in that budget offer. And so there might be some MPs, if they were given freedom on the conservative side, who would be tempted to vote for the budget. When it comes to the Bloc Québécois, the thing is, they have a list of demands of things they wish were in the budget and that they're really angry that they're not going to be in the budget, but they're not saying that what is going to be in the budget is bad. And so it's going to be hard for them to justify not voting for measures that they're not actually criticizing just because they wish other things that are not existent existed. And so it's going to be hard for them to justify that position to the voters if they were to vote no. And as far as the NDP is concerned, is that they are so weak that it just takes one or two people, going to the bathroom or abstaining. Or doing something.
You can vote on your phone, Emily. You can do it from anywhere. We've seen the bloopers.
Yeah, I know. But it's. I mean, I just don't have time to entertain the fact that we would go into an election.
I'm with you.
One of the reason is I mean, we don't have. One of the things that conservatives have been saying is that it's so scandalous that the G7 country does not operate with a budget. We haven't been operating with a budget since the spring. And now we would be delaying having a budget again. That is something that both the political class and general people in Canada would just have no time for. And so I think that grown adults should be able to communicate and compromise, and that's what I expect from the House of Commons.
Not the spring, Emily, the spring of 2024, April 16th of 2024,
right.
to be
That's
precise.
right.
So it's been a minute
right.
since we've done a budget. And the fiscal update last
right.
year got overshadowed by that other bit of writing Chrystia Freeland did. Look, the size of the deficit is going to matter, what you buy with the debt is going to matter, and the size of the cost cutting in the civil service is really going to matter in terms of how people vote. But so much of this is just in response to what's happening with the United States and the trade relationship. And Ontario Premier Doug Ford, he was asked about this again today, repeatedly asked today, whether the Prime Minister told him not to run his anti-tariff ad in the United States that Donald Trump says led to the end of talks. And the Premier didn't give a direct answer.
Premier, did Mark Carney ask you not to run the anti-tariff ad?
Well, I'm not going to get into he said, back and forth. I don't think the people of Canada want that.
You don't want to correct the public record here? The Prime Minister says he had to apologize, and he said that he asked you specifically not to run the commercial.
Well, again, I'm not going to go back and forth. I had a different recollection of our conversation, but that's, people don't need that. They want to move forward.
Was your recollection
remember him saying no?
You don't remember him saying
No, again, I'm not going down that avenue. I know, I've talked to him this morning through text message. We have a great relationship.
Are you able to share your recollection, Premier?
I'm just not going to go down that avenue. I'm not jumping into that bear trap.
Okay. So after President Donald Trump called off trade talks ostensibly over the ad, Ford says Carney did call him a couple of times to pull it. He let it run throughout the weekend, though. And it looks like federal ministers who went en masse to British Columbia, they've also convinced Premier David Eby not to run ads in the United States.
I knew that it was a source of anxiety for many people, including potentially the federal government, given the reaction to the Ontario tariffs. One of my commitments to the federal government was that if they came to the table with us, if they sat with us, that we would work with them on communications, on strategy, on how to support the sector and how to move forward.
Okay, so there you go. Jordan, Doug Ford's ads are not going to run again. David Eby's ad campaign is on indefinite. He said he's only going to do advertising if it's in conjunction with the federal government. What does this tell you about where things have gone on dealing with the United States since things broke off?
Well, I mean, I think people are responding to the mercurial nature of President Trump's reaction to Canada in general. And look here, you've got two premiers of two very different political stripes, both going to great lengths today to be team players with the federal government. So I think generally speaking, I'd say that's a good sign for the Canadian Federation and probably very helpful to the federal government to see that they're able to pull people back in. One of the challenges that the federal government has had as we've gotten a little bit further into these trade negotiations on again, off again, is that they haven't really taken that leadership position among the first ministers, among the provinces quite as visibly as they did earlier on, even preceding the election in March. So I think that there's been allowed to grow a perception that there's a divide between, for example, Ford and the Prime Minister when, in actual fact, they're probably, they're talking pretty frequently, and I don't think there's really much space between them, maybe just some tactical disagreement. So this is an opportunity for the Prime Minister to reach out, and not just to the First Ministers, but also to stakeholders in business community, in the labor community, and bring people in a little bit about what their plan is.
Information sharing instead of just burden sharing, right, is one of the complaints. Kate, what do you make of this? Ford is not going into the bear trap for a change, and David Eby said, forget it, we're not going to run our ads now after conversations with the feds.
I think it's critical that Canada has one voice around the negotiation table right now as best possible. And there's a difference between kind of, lobbying for support of the various sectors in your province and running an antagonistic advertisement that is designed to get under the skin of the president. And lo and behold, he reacted the way that anybody, you don't need a psychoanalysis or a psychology degree to know how the president was likely to respond to that ad. So this has been a pretty expensive waste of time for the province, but also for the federal government, who's now left to kind of pick up the pieces of something that I think was understood to be a problem for a long time. This ad didn't come from nowhere. The rhetoric that has been coming from Ontario has been a challenge for the U.S. and the administration for quite some time, and I suspect that the federal government knew that very well. And I think that they quite enjoyed for a long time the good cop, bad cop dance that they had with the Premier and the Prime Minister, and now it has backfired spectacularly. So what we have is a budget that's going to be very expensive, a skyrocketing deficit because we haven't been able to resolve the tariff dispute that the Prime Minister committed to resolve. And I just have to say, for Canadians to be told back in March and April that we were going to have a new partnership and that, it was elbows up and the Prime Minister was going to stand up to Donald Trump, and now he's apologizing for the advertisement, might be the right thing to do. But that is we're very far from the spring when the Prime Minister had a very different message. And I do wonder how that is going to play with his base of supporters that was adamant that we cannot cave to Donald Trump when it seems that is all that we have been doing since the Prime Minister got elected.
Well, Trump has been president less than 300 days, Supriya, and look at where we are. They must have been very worried about a British Columbia ad, because I think there was like 4 ministers out there today to meet with David Eby. So what do you make of this, that the ads are either down or not going up at all?
Look, I mean, we need our Prime Minister, regardless of, what party that will, they're leader of to stand up for Canadians and our economy and jobs. And you're clearly not going to get anywhere with the Trump administration if you're, being overly antagonistic to Kate's point, or if you're doing something they're not going to like. I will just point out, though, Trump didn't have an initial visceral tantrum over the commercial. It took him a few days, right? Initially, he was like, I would take out that ad too. And it was only after the fact that the Reagan Foundation called into question the authenticity of the remarks, or, not having the proper legal license to use the footage or the voicing of it, did then Trump post to Truth Social that it was going to be an issue. So it seems like Trump himself, has evolved when it comes to the ad. So I think we're all blaming Ford a little bit too much, to be honest. Like, I can understand why people are annoyed with him. I can understand why people would think, particularly if you're part of the federal government, that it was not the right time to put forward this ad, because according to Prime Minister Carney in the presser that he gave over the weekend, in responding to questions, they were very, very close. There was, a bunch of very comprehensive, detailed issues that were moving along, and it all just came to a sudden stop. But it kind of seems like we're setting a terrible precedent here if every time anybody at another order of government says something that pisses off President Trump, the prime minister has to apologize for it. So, like, what happens if a mayor or, another premier or a member of a provincial legislature says something, or there's some motion, condemning Trump? Like, are we just going to be in constant apology mode? I can certainly understand why he would need to apologize in this specific instance, given the fact that, the commercial did get under the president's skin to the degree in which it did. But I don't know. It's like you have to ask, like, well, when does it end? And to Kate's point, there is that dichotomy between the spring and now, and you're going to have to square that circle at some point.
Yeah, look, I didn't raise the issue to blame Doug Ford because this is Donald Trump's trade war. He started it. It's Donald Trump's fault, right? That what everybody does. I mean, this is why we're in this and why the economy is where it is. Emily, we're tight on time. The last 30 seconds, 40 seconds to you.
What's happening is reminding me of the beginning of COVID, when people thought it was going to go great. Here in Quebec, people had rainbows in their window, and we're saying everything's going to go great. Now we're feeling the fatigue, and so I think the elbows up moment was a little bit of that. It was that enthusiasm, and now we're realizing that the American empire is much bigger than us, and that it's going to take sacrifices, that it's not going to go easy. There perhaps is never been more of a need for foreign policy to be centralized in Ottawa. And so premiers can talk directly to their counterparts at the state level. But national TV ads is also including the White House. And I think Mark Carney should be the person speaking to the White House right now, not the premiers.
Okay, we got to leave it there. I want to thank you all for being here the night before the budget. Jordan Leichnitz, Supriya Dwivedi, Kate Harrison, and Emily Nicola. Thank you all so much.